Okay, I think we can probably start to tiptoe our way there. Welcome everybody to tonight's program, Applying for Fellowships and Grants, Demystifying the Process, brought to you by Foco.inc. Before we begin, we're going to have a few words from our Executive Director, Mr. Bill Aguado.
Oh, Charlie, thank you very much. Like Charlie said, I want to welcome everybody to this webinar. As Executive Director, we pride ourselves, and Foco prides itself in support of artists. It has done so since 1974, and in recent years, we have provided 10 fellowships for photographers and 5 grants for media artists. It's important for the applicants to understand that this process is a very competitive process, but there is a panel that adjudicates each request. The staff does not have a say in who gets an award. It's the panel itself who will ultimately determine the award. To guarantee that the integrity continues, the panelists are changed every year. We hope that this is the beginning of a mutual relationship between the applicant, you and the audience, and Foco. We pride ourselves in allowing people to voice their challenges and to help us define what the needs are of the artists today. I just want to acknowledge that Charlie Vazquez and Betty Yu are the panelists of today. And they will take it from here. Any questions, any issues on Infoco, please feel free to contact us directly at info@infoco.org. Charlie, please take it away.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Bill. Okay, so let's jump right in. My name is Charlie Vazquez. I'm a writer, arts consultant. You can read more about me at charlievazquez.com. And the reason I'll be hosting tonight's event is that I've served as a panelist for a number of organizations for visual arts and literary prizes, much like what Infoco offers and why what a lot of you will be hopefully applying toward. We'd like to do a land acknowledgement since we're based in the Bronx. This is the indigenous land of the Lenape. And a little bit about Infoco, if you're new to the organization, is a nonprofit organization that supports contemporary, primarily US-based photographers of African, Asian, Latino, Latinx, Native American, and Pacific Islander heritage. Founded in 1974, Infoco makes our work visible to the art world, yet remain accessible to underserviced communities. Through exhibitions, workshops, events, and publications, we provide professional recognition, honoraria, and assistance to photographers as they grow into different stages of their careers. We will be getting to a Q&A toward the end of the program, which I'll announce later on. But should your question not get addressed tonight, we're expecting a pretty good sized crowd. I'd like you to write down, please, this email address where you can send all questions that don't get covered so that you get the information you need. That address is grants, grants, @Infoco, ENFOCO.org. And without further ado, I will introduce today's guest. Betty Yu is the Infoco Media Fund 2021 and Photography Fellowship 2020 winner. She's also a multimedia artist and activist, born and raised in New York City to Chinese immigrant parents. She's a co-founder of Chinatown Art Brigade, a collective using art to advance anti-gentrification organizing. Ms. Yu was awarded residencies and fellowships from Laundromat Project, A Blade of Grass, International Studio and Curatorial Program, Intercultural Leadership Institute, Skidmore's Documentary Storytellers Institute, KODA Lab, Asian American Arts Alliance, Foco, China Residencies, Flux Factory, and the Santa Fe Art Institute. Her work has been presented at the Brooklyn Museum, Queens Museum, Margaret Mead Film and Video Festival, Tribeca Film Festival's Interactive Showcase, the 2019 Brick Biennial, Old Stone House, and Squeaky Wheel Film and Media Art Center. She holds a BFA from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, an MFA in Integrated Media Arts from Hunter College, and a one-year certificate from International Center of Photography's New Media Narratives program. So I'll just be launching straight into the conversation we'll be having tonight, more of a casual dialogue about both ends of the application process. We'll be learning from Betty Yu's perspective as an applicant who has successfully been awarded a number of times. And I'll sort of complement that feedback with my experience as a panelist to give all of you an idea of how the whole sort of assembly line works. I know for a lot of applicants, you hit send or upload and you get an email back 2 or 3 months later, but there is a process. And there are people on the other end of that transaction who are going to be evaluating your work for a number of reasons. And the more you know about that, the better you can position yourself for success. So my first question to Betty is, like, looking back, why do you feel that your 2020 and 2021 applications were funded? And what sort of general strategies can you share with the attendees tonight who are joining us?
Great. Thank you so much, Charlie, for that introduction, and Bill for the introduction, and Foco really for the awards. I've been blessed to have received both the media works in progress as well as the photography fellowship. So I can talk about both of those things. And I know both of them have different requirements, but I can talk about takeaways and perhaps some tips. But I do want to first also acknowledge, thank you for the land acknowledgement. I'm calling in or zooming in from Brooklyn, the ancestral lands of the Lenape people as well, but specifically the Canarsie, which was a tribe within the Lenape Nation. So I just thank you so much for grounding us in that, and that's so important. But again, thank you for inviting me to talk about my process of applying for these 2 grants. I just have to say that, it really gave me the booster and the confidence that I needed to continue my photography project. I studied film and video and new media, but photography was something that I didn't really return to until later in my career. So getting the recognition from Foco was one of the first awards I received for my photography. And it really, really was reassuring and gave me the boost and confidence to continue the project. And also led to other print publications reaching out to me to print some of the photos that you all printed out in the magazine and was a part of the online exhibition. So it really, just to say that it really, Foco is such an established and well-known institution that really, has stuck to its roots of, media arts and photography for and by people of color that are community rooted. And I really appreciate that. And just to say, whoever is out there thinking of applying, that really does lead to a lot of amazing opportunities. So jumping in and diving in more concretely, I love that question of why do I think I received the grants? And I don't know for sure exactly, but I can say that I think that, I spent a lot of time working on the application. So I know it's always said on these sessions, started early, started a couple of weeks in advance, but I do that for all of these applications. And, I downloaded, I got the questions, in front of me. And also mainly because I don't know about you all, I am someone who's very passionate in when I talk about my projects. And I tend to write a lot, right? And there's a word count, right? As you can see from the application, for all applications, there's a word count. So being really careful about that. And so my strategy is always to write out my narrative. Usually it's longer than the 300 or 500 words. And then the last 2 weeks really finessing and figuring out what is it I want to say in the most succinct way as possible. But I think for me, I really communicated very clearly my personal connection and how passionate I was about the project. So both of the projects that were funded, the photography fellowship that I received was based on a project called Displaced in Sunset Park. And it was photographing using my parents, who I was born and raised in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, an immigrant Latinx and Chinese community that has been for about 40, 45 years. But I wanted to document through their perspective, working class folks who are retired on a fixed income, what does gentrification look like? How does it impact working class like families like my parents? And I was photographing the interior life and the external life, them out in the community, right? And I started it before COVID, obviously, and I was awarded this before COVID, but then I had to shift gears and continue to photograph in a safe way. But I really communicated very clearly what did the project mean for me, right? And not that everyone has a really direct personal connection to the project you're submitting, but really, what is the stake? What's at stake? What is your own personal connection, whether it be maybe not so direct that it's family members you're photographing, but why do you care about the issue? And so both, like I said, the photography project that I end up submitting samples of, I really was very thoughtful about making sure that even though I wasn't totally ready to show my work in progress photographs to the world, I submitted them as for my work samples. So folks could see that I started to really think about how do I photograph my family and the community in the most respectful way to really show how gentrification has impacted them, literally with condos going up in the block, how it's impacted the price of groceries around the neighborhood, mom and pop places are gone, and then their interior life, which is a very humble apartment they live in. And then you kind of see these high rises like literally next door to them on the same block. So I wanted to communicate that in a very visceral way, visually, that the visuals illustrated for themselves what I was trying to communicate. And so, like, again, I know it can't be underscored enough, like just being super clear about that in your narrative, about, just assuming that no one knows what you're talking about, and just starting from baseline, not being verbose, using simple language about what it is. I always think about the 5 W's, right? The who, where, what, why, and the when. And then maybe how, right? Because how do you have access to these communities or the subject that you're photographing? And so I really think through that piece of it in my narrative, that I really want to also in my application for both grants, I also talked about my intentionality, right? Like, for me, and I know that in Foco, the principles of social justice are very much undergirding the work. And for me, it's not just about poverty porn, right? It's not just about showing people impoverished in a community, but that I want people to see that folks are actually galvanizing and like coming together and fighting back, and in small and big ways. And so that was important for me to also show that in my work, and not just the, kind of lens into the family, into my family or community, but the other aspect of what people are actually doing about it. I have some more to say. I know I've been kind of talking a lot, but I have some more to say about like some tips in terms of, when you write your artist statement versus your bio and things like that. I don't know if I should kind of dive right in because I think people get really confused by those two things. And the only reason why I've learned by trial and error is because I've applied for quite a number of these kind of grants. And, I have mentors and people who talk me through things, but I don't know if I should dive into that or hold off. What do you?
We're going to get to the writing part specifically.
Okay, cool.
That was a great entree.
Okay.
I just want to kind of bounce off of what you said there. You brought up a couple of really great points from the panelist reviewers end, considerations that sometimes people don't take into account. Number one is the human story. This is, after all about, there's storytelling, right? The images sort of capture things and relate stories. If you're using people in figurative compositions, what stories are they being told? What stories are the photographs showing rather, that you do not have to tell us in your writing? And I see a lot of times that people have the opportunity to use the narrative sections to go deeper, to take what you established in the visuals and the photographs and use the narratives to explore that further. You don't have to write what's already obvious to us and using up that word count to be redundant. That's your opportunity to really go deeper. Number one, so the human story. Number two, as a panelist, it is obvious which applicants took their time and submitted something that comes across in this very relaxed, confident, well thought out way, as opposed to people who crammed it in the last 6 hours before the deadline. It is totally obvious. Your application is going to get reviewed alongside others. It's not in a vacuum on its own. And how do you want to compare as in relation to everyone else in that batch? So do take your time. just give it, it's writing, especially the writing element can really throw a lot of visual artists off. I'm a writer, so I could go off about that, I won't. But the best writing happens in layers. You sleep on it, your subconscious works with you. You bring things out, things come up later that you don't think of in that first draft. And to write with dimension and humanity, give yourself at least 2 to 3 revisions to really get that narrative nice and crispy. I know that's not everyone's strength, but it's so important, especially if you're being evaluated for it. It's going to affect your score ultimately. So anyway, I wanted to sort of touch those 2 things before we do move on to the writing, right? Because I think for a lot of visual artists, the writing can come across as really scary. And something I see sometimes is that people use a lot of jargon-loaded, over-technical, over-academic work to relate a simple story. Okay, this isn't a college, it's not a college exam. And I'm okay with that. Like, I can navigate academic writing, but not everyone in the arts necessarily does. And you may be getting evaluated by a multi-generational panel of different education levels and so forth that all share sort of the artistic discipline in common. So sometimes a conversational tone, I've noticed, is a great way to approach that. But sometimes the technical language is what the funding opportunity is looking for. So how do you approach the voice of the writing given the type of award that you're applying for in relation to the visuals?
That's a really good question. And I'm glad you brought that up because it was very different, reviewing my applications that I submitted for the media arts as well as photography, and they're both really different. And so I'm glad you asked that question. For me, for those that might be thinking about applying for the media arts work in progress grant, I think it's really important, and maybe it's really obvious, but sometimes the obvious things need to be stated, which is that you really need to walk the person through, whoever's reading it, your narrative. Like, what are you trying to say? What is the arc of the story? What's the beginning, middle, and end? And even with the photography, obviously there's still photographs, but you obviously have something in mind for each decisive moment that you've captured in the photograph. You have something in mind, right? What's the story you're communicating? But I think for the media arts one, you have to honestly be a little more hand-holding, right? A little more maybe didactic. And I know sometimes we want to leave things very kind of loose and like open for interpretation, but no, here you want the money. You want to stand out. That's the key thing. You want your application to stand out. You're unique. Your work is kick-ass. How are you going to communicate that? For the media arts one, just to say very briefly, I received the award to basically work on a 360 VR project that was called a 2020 De-Gentrifying Manifesto for 2050. And what that meant was that it was basically an experimental hybrid documentary, like using 360 and virtual reality to turn a dystopian future of what we are witnessing now basically into something futuristic, right? That really looks at the possibilities of what de-gentrification and decolonization can look like. A future where we've passed the point of fighting against, but we actually see the justice that we've actually been longing for. And so, so all that to say that sounds super abstract. And so I used 1,000 words, which I had to say, thank you for the 1,000 word count for the media arts narrative, because you need that much to describe what it is the project, what your project is. And other folks who received this grant, I know in my cohort, some were animators and some were experimenting with mixed media collage, digital and paper collage. It was really interesting, all the issues that folks are addressing. But for my project, I literally had to walk through, and again, I'm glad you said that, Charlie. Again, with this process, I started it further back than I did the photography one, because I had to script out, what is this going to look like? Not that you have to, not to intimidate anyone, like if you're submitting a film or a video or a new media project. But for me, I wanted to be clear about what am I trying to say? So I treated it like I created an outline, like a storyboard, but with words more. And I figured out, okay, this is the beginning, middle, and end. This is where the transformation happens. This is where like a narrative, like any arc, right? This is where the crescendo happens, the falling, whatever. It's that point of like the conflict, where we change from dystopia to a utopian kind of environment. And so I really tried to not just say the words, because that can be like gobbledygook, like what the hell are you talking about? These are all just words. but I actually, in my description, walk through what people would see. So it would be, it starts off with my parents' house, like a 360 video of my parents' house. And then we go to seeing all the destruction with construction and everything happening and the condos going up. And I literally describe visually illustrating what folks will see. And I have to say that that was really, really very, very important for me to actually think through what is it I'm trying to say, not just for this application process, but for yourself, like what is it you're trying to say? And then for the photography fellowship, for that application, again, I think you just said it really beautifully, which is that, what can you say in your work, the very little few words you have, the 300 words you have in your description about the project, that's the first thing that people will see. So what can you say that the photos won't say? Because the photos of my parents, you can literally see them being swallowed up by these condos on our block, right? I don't have to say that, but what deeper meaning can I provide that you can't see from the photographs? And I think what is really helpful that you guys provide in the guidelines, I just have to say real quick, you say literally, describe specific aspects of your work, such as subject matter, context, content, and location. And what is your personal relevance to the work submitted? That is so clear. And I literally use that as a template when I wrote up my 300 words, because 300 words is not a lot. And that was really helpful. I was like, okay, what is pulling me to do this? And so to get across the context, content, and what is your connection? Not many words. That's literally not even 2.5 paragraphs. So that guiding question, and just to let folks know, like, just to look at the fine print, because it's like in small print, that was really, really helpful for me.
Yeah.
Tremendously helpful for me.
Yeah, it's an important point you made, because I think a lot of times people get really excited about the work and or they get overwhelmed by the application process, and they forget really, really simple things like abide by the guidelines. If they ask for 10 images at so-and-so DPI, make sure that you meet the guidelines. And what you said about taking the question and inverting it into the answer, right? How do you feel your work addresses? I feel that my work addresses, like, literally turn that question inside out and provide your answer to it, so that you're aligning, you want to align everything. You want to align the responses to how the questions are phrased. You want to abide by all the guideline rules in terms of what kind of work. And you mentioned something interesting about matching the narrative that accompanied, how you sort of organize the narrative to follow the sequence of the work. Is that what you were describing?
Yeah, and I know in some cases, some work is really non-linear, and I'm talking more about the media arts one, because I know with the photography, it's a little different. But if you are creating a linear or non-linear piece, honestly, of course, you don't know everything that you're gonna be filming or animating, but you have to have some idea. And I think that, because I've also been on the other side as a juror for different arts grants, and it's so frustrating when you read somebody's narrative and you can tell they have it in them. They're super talented, but they're not telling you what is happening. They're not telling you what they're trying to get across. Like, what is, literally tell me what is happening. And so for my narrative, I literally, say, the first 5 minutes, this is what I'm thinking it will look like. And this is when it changes from dystopia to how folks fight for this, for a brighter future. And like, this is what you'll see, even though I'm still working on it. I'm still working on the animation. I'm still working with a team of folks. And so I think that gives you a lot of an opportunity to be clear yourself, because I'll 9 times out of 10, I think folks will honestly gloss over the application where it's just more statement, but you're not actually saying visually how you're communicating that, since we're in the visual arts and this is photography and media. And I think that's where the work samples really come into play. Honestly, the work samples, not to say you have to pull at the heartstrings, but your work samples had to be, whether, my strategy was I actually chose work samples that were already, that I was starting to produce for the projects, but you may not have that. And I know that that's okay. But, really just thinking through how your work samples really match up with your narrative that you're submitting. So if you're like profiling like a community group, like let's say fighting for police, for police accountability or something, as a, leaders or let's say you're photographing them, you're not going to submit something obviously still life, right? You're not going to, so I mean, just generally speaking, I know it's common sense, but I also would recommend spending a lot of time looking through your portfolio of what you're going to submit. Because speaking for myself, and probably, I know, Charlie, you've been on a lot of panels, I really do look at in fact, the work samples, I kind of skip to the work samples first to see what kind of talent this person has. And I'll be like, okay, let me go back to the narrative. I mean, I know not everyone does it this way. So I think that that's a mistake to leave the work samples literally for like the last 10 minutes before you press upload. Like it has to be really thought out, and how are, what's the emotion or the, visceral effect that you want to communicate through the photographs, through your video samples. Like that really matters, because that's what people will take away from your application, is that visual marker, I think.
Yeah, and also when I've applied for literary awards, I was put into the position, much like you and the artists on the call here, of having to write about my work for the first time, right? To have to write about writing, or in your guys' case, to write about media arts and photography. You can use these opportunities to learn more about what it is that you do. So I think a lot of times we operate as artists, the inspiration is very mysterious, and you said it can be sort of non-linear and intuitive. And when you sort of have to articulate that, when you have these opportunities to articulate that, it's a really great way to learn about what it is that you do. And I think especially I've known so many visual artists and photographers, still photographers, that rearranging, you could pick 10 random photos from your portfolio and rearrange them in different sequences, right? And what are the different arcs that they're going to suggest? So I think that there's an opportunity to sort of work with the subconscious and use it as an opportunity to learn how to perceive your work in ways that you may not have made yourself do had you not put yourself in the applicant's seat. The other thing I wanted to ask about was, we got to the sequence. You said that one of the first things you do is skip to the work samples. All of the people who showed me how to write grants went straight to the budget. And I know that this is the final, so we're gonna cover the 4 pillars. And I want everyone on the call to write these 4 things down, because this will help you so much to conceptualize this and make your applications cohesive from this point forward. Okay, so number 1, you said your overview, your guidelines, what concept you're sort of connecting to the guidelines of the opportunity. Number 2 is the project narratives, right? That includes all your bio, your artist statement. Those are all different documents, and they need to read differently, okay? They're related, but they're not 3 different versions of the same document. So really, we may want to explore that a little bit, because I know that throws people off. The 3rd pillar, okay, are the work samples. And the 4th is the budget, or budgets. Okay, I'm just gonna say this first of all. The budget is not a separate document. It is your proposal in numbers. So if you're proposing to buy 10 units of this at this price, and you're gonna hire, whatever your project is, if you're paying honoraria, if you're buying supplies, if you're paying for rentals, if whatever, exhibition framing fees, whatever it may be. And that's why taking your time to put your application together really works to your benefit, because it's really easy to lose sight of some of these expenditures, which need to reflect in your budget. Some people go straight to the budget and they understand the project in numbers and quantities and dollars and cents first, and then they go to read about the concepts and learn about the work and the rest of it, which we tend to think of first. So think of your budget from now on as it is literally your proposal changed into numbers, okay? And if you're proposing 10 of this and so forth in the proposal, and they don't even show up as a line item in your expenses in the budget, you're likely not going to get awarded. Everything has to match up. So we'll get to the budget in a minute, but the 3 writing sample, I mean, sometimes the 3 most common are the artist statement, the bio, and then I guess sort of work sample narratives. Is that right? So do you have any tips for people to use each of those formats, to optimize each of those formats, to do the most work with the least lifting?
Yeah. So, depending on whether you are a first-time grant writer as an artist or someone who's kind of seasoned and has been, applying for many, many of these grants, it's always really good to make sure that, and I've done it myself, where you're like copy and paste your bio artist statement, but also think about, who, your audience, think about the mission of the grant, and also perhaps the folks that might be reading it and your competitors, so sometimes you've got to update your artist statement slightly or your bio. But I think that folks do sometimes get these two kind of confused. The bio, right, is often literally like the facts, like what kind of artist are you? What mediums do you work with? Where have you shown grants, residencies, things like that, right? Like really just like the black and white facts almost. Some people, everyone uses a kind of a different tone, but usually it's written in third person, right? You can give a sense of where you were born and raised or something like that, but really kind of more, these are the facts. And then the artist statement usually is more pulling at the heartstrings, and you're being more descriptive and maybe even emotional, in the sense that you are talking about, it's an introduction to your body of work. You're telling folks like, this is what motivates me to do this work. And so that's how I approach it. And in most artist statements that I have read, they really start out by saying, this is what I care about. These are the issues I care about, or the ideas I care about. And this is how it's presented in my work. And this is why I care about it. This is my kind of connection to it. And then usually the second paragraph, you can flow into some examples, some body of work that sort of illustrates that. And then you can even in there, you can even talk about your approach and your style, right? Maybe you're more, whether it's documentary or hybrid, whatever it is, fiction, nonfiction, depending on if you're applying for a video or photography, you want to get kind of descriptive about who you are. And this is the artist statement where you can. And I believe the artist statement is the one that's a little bit longer in word count. Mm-hmm. And the bio, I think it's like 250 or 300 words. So I would say that to, again, really think of these, like you said, two separate documents. You're not like, they really should not be overlapping in any way. Use those words, every single word, because the word count is so limited, right? And all these applications in general. And that you really want to be very, very thoughtful about, intentional about each word that you use. So my advice is to say as much as you can, right? And make sure those two things don't overlap. One, again, is black and white. What have you done? Where have you shown? Where you can even say, your background, your education, or, self-taught. And then the artist statement is much more about you and like much more personal. And then I think that you were asking about, the description. So I know for the media arts one, it's like 1,000 words. And for the photography, it's 300 words. And some people would say, what? I even looked at it, I'm like, what am I going to say 300 words? You can say a lot, actually. You really can. And you have to use your words wisely, which is why I think folks just do a free write. You just kind of like have like a, kind of a barf of your thoughts on paper, and then spend some time really whittling it down using the 5 whys, if that's W's, if that's how you work. Or again, basically, what is the essence of the project that you want to communicate? And I have to say that this is the first thing that everyone sees. This is the first question that everyone sees an answer to. So it's kind of the most important, I think, because it's your idea of what you want them to give you money for and funded. So I usually try to just show it to someone who doesn't know anything about my work. Like a base, like, not that, they don't have, it's best actually, maybe they're not an artist. They're your friend or somebody who will be brutally honest with you. Like, do they understand what the hell you're trying to communicate? And that's usually like a good testing ground, I think. And so, yeah, and I can go into budget stuff if like.
Yeah. And also for the fellowship, just for some additional context, I mean, the photographs are what actually are most important. So it has to be quality work. I'm not suggesting in any way that the writing can make up for images that are sort of lacking or not up to professional standards. So the work has to be, think like museum quality, right? And everything else is there to sort of, you're pitching the work. Everything else, the artist statement, everything, the budget, everything, the work is sort of the centerpiece. That's what will get exhibited. That's what will get published in Loose or other magazines. So you have to start with quality work to begin with, and the rest of this sort of is there to support that. You mentioned showing your applications to a peer, getting people to give you feedback. Another reason why you should take time, right? So has that proven useful for you? Have you sent it to someone you know before you sent it away and gotten feedback that helped you?
Yeah, I have usually I'll send it to one person who is also in the same field of arts field, and then somebody who is someone who's like literally not an artist, but obviously has can master the English language, right? Someone who can dissect what I'm saying, and I've gotten really honest answers. Like I actually don't know what you're trying to say here. It's too verbose, it's too complicated, like the VR, AR, like what's happening with this animation and the technical stuff. And so even especially for the media arts one, I think I had to dial down, like, even though I'm not an expert in some of the technical aspects of VR, I know some of it, but I realized that I don't have to show off and use all that fancy like language in there. I can actually just, again, in very simple language, a very simple description, describe what it is that people will see and what will happen, and that hopefully they trust me and that I will figure out the other part, the technical part of it. And of course, the photography one doesn't have a budget requirement, but like you said, it was really helpful for me to think through the budget for my media arts grant proposal, because I thought about, okay, so this is going to be multilingual. Okay, what cost for that? For the things like the VR glasses and like, working with a consultant. One thing I'll say about the budget is if you can put in kind, meaning labor or meeting spaces or shooting locations or equipment that is donated. I always put it in there to show that I have these relationships and I have these things already kind of crossed off as donated, as in kind donations. And then if you've secured or you're looking to secure other grants, usually you can add another column of like pending grants or secured grants. I know not recognizing everyone is at a different level with applying for money, but that also is really helpful. It shows that you've really been thinking very thoughtfully and very thoughtfully about how you're going to actually make this project happen. Because at the end of the day, the panelist is thinking, okay, how, is this person actually going to complete their project? And so, like you said, the work samples are really, you're right, it's like utmost importance, right? Like to show the talent, but also making sure that, you show this work, again, balancing it out with your work description, and being honest with your description of your project you're submitting. Like if it sounds too too ambitious to do in under a year, people are just gonna they're gonna realize that you're maybe too green or you're not experienced enough to understand like what it takes to complete a photo or a media arts project. So I think all those things have to be taken into account.
Yeah, and I know that we want to switch over at about 6:45 to Q&A, and we're getting close. So in terms of the budget, the in-kind is really attractive on the reviewing end because it shows that other people believe in your project, and that you're collaborating with people who want to help push you to the finish line. So that's a great suggestion. Put in-kind expenses, anything being donated to you or given to you as an in-kind expense. And let's talk a little bit more about the budget. Do you sort of start sketching that alongside? Do you get to that at the end? I mean, how does that work for you?
To be honest, I've worked on budgets for different projects. For this one, I literally wrote out my narrative, wrote out everything ahead of time. I'm kind of obsessive with these things, so I read things over a lot. But the budget in this case was at the very end. And not saying that that's the best way to do it. Like I've done it reverse for film projects where, not reverse, but you're thinking about, okay, this is going to be a 20-day shoot. And so you're trying to kind of match up the numbers with your narrative and especially if it's, outside of New York City and travel costs and all that. But anyway, to say that my budget was actually pretty simple, I really, really knew that I had some in-kind support donated labor from folks who had the skills to help me complete. And I recognize that everyone has that. If you don't have that, put consultation fees on there, right? Like you're going to work with a designer, you're going to work with an editor, let's say, something like that. But, you know, you don't want to leave the juror kind of already kind of with question marks, like they mentioned X, Y, and Z in their narrative that they're going to do, but how is that actually going to happen? Like spell it out for them. If it's like in kind or donated, or maybe you're the person who knows all these things, like spell that out. I'm a strong proponent of like paying yourself and compensating yourself. And I recognize that, you know, this grant, you know, it's sizable, but may not be what you would normally pay yourself for an artist fee. But you might want to say, you know, a few hundred, this is the percentage of an artist fee for myself or for the editor. So artist fees are really important. Yourself as a, you know, photographer, or, you know, I'm sorry, this is for the media arts, for editing, for camera, whatever it is, really think it through. Like for myself, like I said, I had to think through, okay, this is going to be in Spanish, Chinese, and English. So I need to pay someone who is going to translate and is going to help me transcribe it, you know, the piece. I want this to be presented in the time when we're ready to present things where people could put goggles on. So I put, you know, for the VR experience, so I budgeted for that. You know, I budgeted for someone to help part of their consultation fee as I wrap up, you know, the project to kind of help me with the final designing of it. So, and then the last thing, I'm looking at the budget right now, the last thing was I put in, you know, the final sound mix and color correction for the actual video. And so I did add like where there was in-kind money or where there was, I was able to secure money from other places. And again, you know as someone who's read proposals, that's not like a make or break, like a deal breaker, but it just helps the person see that, oh, you're committed to this project. You clearly have been thinking about
That you
this.
took time to develop it and didn't just throw it together in a minute. And sometimes budgets have their own guidelines, like you can only use so and so percent. So sometimes that'll impact what you can and cannot do. And let's talk about the R word, because as Bill said in the beginning, you know, a lot of times people think that the staff of the staff of different foundations or organizations make the decisions on who wins and who doesn't, which doesn't happen. We bring in panelists and rotate those from year to year. So it's a highly subjective experience. You can submit the same exact application one year and really touch 3 or 4 people on the panel and make it in and not quite have the same impact the following year with different people. So how do you handle rejection? I'm a writer. 9 out of 10 times that we apply for something, we get rejected. And we learn how to use rejection as a way to try to get better, right? To learn, to get panelist feedback if you're able to. So how do you do that? Because I know a lot of times it can be really discouraging, especially for younger artists who really put their heart and soul into their work. And you get those rejection emails and they're always polite, but they always sort of sting at first. What sort of advice do you have? Because I think a lot of people just give up there and you have to keep pushing forward and keep applying. And you know, what would you suggest?
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of experience in like turning that into a positive. So it sounds like you have a lot of pointers too. But for me, I think the trend has more been in the last few years. I think that, you know, if you ask for feedback on your application, they will provide it to you. Usually they'll synthesize. Like I've been on a number of grant jury panels in the last like 3 years. And, you know, the program officer who's facilitating will say, you know, do each of you, we're going to go around, each juror has feedback of why this was rejected or like what they can do, you know, what to improve on, should they reapply? And so the program officer usually says, well, I'm going to synthesize this. I'm not going to literally copy and paste every word that you said, right? Because that would not be a good look, but synthesize it. And oftentimes you have to ask for it. But I noticed that a lot of foundations and a lot of places are offering that, because if we want to build a loving community of like artists that support one another and want one another to succeed, I recognize that there's staff capacity, right? Like there are foundations that have 50 people that work there, and Foco has a few, right? So I recognize capacity issues. But I honest, as someone who's gotten rejected a lot, like all of us get rejected. I always ask for feedback. I appreciate, I thank them, right? Like for sending me, sometimes it's really nice rejection letters, I have to say, like very, very thoughtful. And sometimes they'll include like, this is what the panel thought you can improve and please apply next time. But sometimes it's just a cold thing, it's a cold thing. And usually there's a little, email that, you can respond if you have more questions. And I take every single opportunity to soak in that critique and soak in that feedback. Maybe I don't agree with it, but at least I know what they were. Again, like you said, it's very subjective, depending on who's reading it. So it's not right or wrong. Don't take it personally. Don't feel like your ego is bruised. I know it's hard not to do that, but think about it objectively. What's the feedback that you're like, hey, that's right, I could have been clearer about that. Actually, I didn't actually talk about how I'm going to distribute that or like actually accomplish this. So it makes sense that the person doesn't think this is like doable in a year. Like kind of look at that objectively and then use it to your advantage to strengthen your proposal. And I have reapplied for things where I didn't receive it the first year or the second year, and I'll reapply again, but also sharpening the proposal and like taking the feedback into account, and then I'll get it maybe the third or fourth try.
Yeah, and over time, you learn how to distinguish what feedback is worth it for you and what isn't. Not all the feedback you're going to get is going to help you. But with time, you figure out when people are giving you constructive feedback because they want to see you grow, as opposed to just trying to squash you, which also happens. So you learn how to distinguish between the two, and that feedback that's intended to help you grow is what will eventually help you further along. So we're going to switch over to the Q&A. We have Bill on hand in case there's any Foco specific questions I cannot answer. Thank you so much, Betty. Hang out until the end because we may want to hear from you some more. But Richard Lucent has typed in the Q&A, I have been rejected there times for the fellowship and curious what other approaches to take to help and what human help can I get. So Richard Lucent has applied, it sounds to the Foco fellowships, and is asking for any suggestions on how to help. Something I will suggest, Richard, if you're listening, and this is for everyone really, I think it's a very general question, is what we just kind of walked through. He did type his question at 6:16. So, find someone in the community that you can send your application to, is going to give you feedback that can help really, get your work samples nice and tight. Let me see if Bill's on hand to give any more specific info here. There's Bill. Here's Bill. Are you there, Bill? Your mic. We can't hear you.
The only thing I would say, for someone who has been rejected many, many times and then finally gets accepted, I would take your work to a curator, a photography curator, and perhaps let him give some suggestions as to how you can best present your work. I think it's you have to understand, we view over 100 artists every year, and the vast majority are quality. So how can you get the edge? The edge is talking to a curator, a professional who can help you move forward.
That includes all aspects. So getting the budget tight, getting the writing clean and edited.
Well, for the fellowship, there is no budget.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
And what's important is if there is several artists with strong images, what will be the difference is the artist statement. And like I tell artists, if you don't grab me by the first sentence, don't waste my time for the rest of the.
Yep. The narrative craft is a whole other skill set. So that may be a future program to create to help to address this sort of need. That may be fun to work on. But thank you, Richard, for that, and good luck. Keep in touch with us. An anonymous attendee is asking, will it be possible in the future to get panelist feedback for Enfoco opportunities in particular?
Yes, and we try hard, and you have to understand 120 applications, and 1 year we had 160 applications, and we have 3 panelists to review it all and to do write-ups on everyone is very difficult. So we try, when an artist requests it, we try and go to the panelists and see what if they can give us the information from their notes. But we don't pay panelists a lot, and so it's a very tough process, and we can't figure out a way. We haven't been able to figure out a way how to best do it. But if anyone has any ideas, we are willing to listen.
And remember, if we don't get to you, the email address to get answers for your questions is grants@enfoco.org. We do have 10 minutes left. So Benicia King has a great question. And I think everyone can kind of chime in on this one. You're welcome, Diane. Benicia says, how would an artist or artist team apply to a grant with limited experience required by the organization, but have the network and talent to see the project through? So, I mean, ultimately, Benicia, it's going to be about the work that you submit and how you pitch it and how you back it up with whatever writing is required. So again, you kind of have to align your project to the way the guidelines are sort of worded. Anyone else want to chime in there?
Just follow the rules.
Follow the rules. Follow the guidelines. That's a huge, huge one. And take your time. Take your time. Build that budget up as you're building the proposal. Betty?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Benicia, I know that, it sounds like you're saying your team or you as an artist. I believe you have to apply as an individual for both in both cases, but you can
apply as a group.
Oh, you can apply
as a collective, or there's only one name on the application.
On the name. Yeah, so I was just going to say that having the network is great and knowing the people that you want to photograph, but it's the work samples that are at the end of the day, people are going to look at that. Like I said, as a juror in the past with other foundations, I look at the work samples, and then I'll look at the artist statement and like the objectives of the project, what they're trying to do. But make sure that you have, the team, there's some solid image makers there that can really, visually communicate what it is that you're trying to say with your project. Because the network and that piece of it, that is in the description, in the narrative. You say that you have these access to these stories and communities. That's great. But at the end of the day, people are going to want to see the work.
Right. And if it's a photography fellowship, it's ultimately that all of that work and all that collaboration doesn't get exhibited and published in magazines. The work does. So you kind of have to lead with that as kind of the guiding principle. And there's a question in the chat box that says, you're welcome, Benicia. Thanks for that question. James Asante says, does the work photography have to be based within this year only? So it doesn't sound like the opportunity is time specific. The photos.
Well, it is. I think it's about 3 years. It's within 3 years. And of course, you're on the honor system.
Cool. So there's your answer. That's good to know. And Yolette Francis says, is an applicant taken less seriously if they do not have a website? My gut answer is not really. It always makes you look more professional if you're an artist. That's for sure. Especially if it's really well done. You can do them cheaply and really nicely through Squarespace. And so just so you, in case that's the time and expense is keeping you back, there are inexpensive ways to do it. But you're applying based on your photography, not on your website. So anyone else? While we're here, we have 6 minutes.
Can I add something, Charlie?
Yep. You're the boss.
Yeah. Well, I'm the boss and no one listens to. One of the reasons why we we understand that the notion of rejection is, I mean, it is very deflating. And we try at Foco to figure out ways. And one way that we've done so is we created the Appointment Gallery series to curate artists who were not accepted, who didn't win the fellowship, but had there been more money, they would have been a fellow. So they have quality. So we didn't want them to walk away feeling rejected. We wanted to bring them in the family by giving them an opportunity to exhibit. Doing a seminar like this with Betty and you, it was equally as important. It's our effort to make sure that rejection is not the issue. It's a lack of funding is the issue.
Another reason to get your application top notch, you're competed for limited funding, and it's a limited pool of money, and that puts organizations in a really, really tight spot. I've had to be there where it has to be between one of two applications, and it can get really contested, and you want everyone to win, you know, but you have to be as professional as possible. Jenica asks, Heinzelman, is the photo fellowship meant more for finished projects or for works in progress? Can you talk more about your overall experience with the photo fellowship? Did it change your approach? So Betty, Bill?
For me, it's always been the quality that the panelists review. What the images they see is what they're going to vote on. Nothing else matters.
I have to say that so my images, I felt really strongly about my work in progress images that were from this project about my family and the impact of gentrification, like I said, on my family and the community. My approach, I know it was a pandemic year. It was like, if you all remember, I think we were awarded like that April 2020 or whatever it was. So we didn't have any face-to-face opportunities to see each other, work together. But I will say that the pandemic changed how I actually photograph folks. So I actually photographed in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, how gentrification was still alive and well in immigrant communities like Sunset Park. It looked different. Mom and pop places were disappearing left and right. So that forced me to change the way I was photographing. But in terms of finished work, yeah, I guess Bill just said, you know, it's the work that speaks for itself. Like I said, you know, my final work that I submitted for the Nueva Luz for the publication were some of the ones that I did submit. And one of them ended up on the cover of the magazine, which I was so happy about and was really, you know, I'm so thankful for. But I think it's probably different maybe for different fellows. For me, I just needed the extra kind of confidence to like sharpen some of the works in progress. I think I might have gotten some advice from some of you all, like in terms of that, like which ones work with what for the layout. I worked with the editor, I can't remember her name now, but the editor of the magazine, and you know, she made suggestions, which was super helpful. So those sessions are really like helpful, and I carry that with me in my other photo projects. And like I said, it opens so many doors. Like this fellowship really opened so many doors for me in the photography realm that I am so grateful for, really.
And it winds up becoming in the long run about relationships. This isn't just a transaction. You know, it's not just going to an ATM and hoping you can get money. It's you want to build relationships with the individuals in these organizations and support the other work that you're not involved in. Like it's sort of like it goes both ways. We have one question we have time for, one last one about do we only choose projects that involve social injustice or stories along that line? Or can you submit a project that focuses on anything you like? I imagine the guidelines would specify if there's themes that need to be addressed or not, or if it's just open and about craft.
If it's media, it's open. If it's a fellowship, it's about the images.
Yep. It can be landscapes in Tibet. You know, it's go for museum quality. You know, that seems to be the guiding principle here. But we're just about out of time. I want to thank everyone again. The email address is grants@infoco.org. We'll do what we can to get you the info you need to help you along, to help you move along on your professional trajectory. But you know, the sort of the ending note is that it's all about the work.
I got my own.
It really is all about
I
the work.
got a lot.
And all the other stuff is there to help sell that work. You're pitching your work. The proposals, the writing, the budgets, that's all there to support the work. So you have to start there, you know, create the strongest work you can create, and then, you know, try to pitch that. But hopefully we'll get to see all each other again, maybe next month. We may do a second session. We'll let you know about that. And in the meantime, stay in touch. Have a great holiday season. Anyone have any last minute requests, comments? Nope.
Nope, just good luck, and thank you for inviting me. Good luck. Speak from the heart. Speak from the heart. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Thank you, Betty. That's
The best advice. Speak from the heart.
high quality. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you. Good luck, everyone.